Hello, everyone. Wow, so many people here compared to last year. How many people were here last year? Hands up. So good, some returning figures, that's cool. So the people that were here know I'm the sweary one, and now the people that weren't here also know that I'm the sweary one. So I will be talking to you about how to go faster in financial services. So before I start, because this always causes some confusion, I'm Aubrey Stearn, and I'm the CTO of a very small part of a building society in the UK called Nationwide. I am not the CTO of the whole of Nationwide. Definitely do not tell anybody that or assume that I am that, because it causes a whole lot of contention. So to start this, I've indemnified myself with a picture of a cat, because if it all goes wrong, I gave you a cat. If it does go wrong, remember that I did give you the cat to start with. And the third thing that I wanted to call out was that Twitter feedback is super important, like for both Mark, who gave the opening talk on the first day, and myself. It makes Nationwide warm and fuzzy, and obviously if we want to go on a jolly to Barcelona and get drunk, you have to put the Twitter feedback on there for us to go again next year. So do tweet Nationwide Press, like safely, and Aubrey, Barry, and Links, man. So I'm going to break the talk up into two pieces, which is broadly going faster in a startup, which is what I learned my craft from working in startups, and then how I sort of transferred some of that stuff into the FS organization. Some of the challenges that I met because I inherited the platform that I currently run with Nationwide, and recovery from those challenges. So my career looks something like this. I started off as like a wee minion, doing programming stuff and opsy stuff and exchangey stuff and like a whole spectrum worth of stuff. And then I was at a company and they sacked everybody and said, hey, do you want to take over ops? And I was like, yeah, I've done exchange a few times before. So I took over ops and became head of ops. And I remember my first review where they said, you would basically be the perfect employee except you're unmanageable, so we'll just let you carry on with what you're doing. I thought, yeah, this is really good. So head of ops. Then I left and ran a startup and called myself a lead developer. And then I left the startup because it tanked and it was my startup and did some more lead developer-y things. And then I became head of DevOps because I had done all this opsy stuff and that made lots of sense to me. And then I did that a few more times. And I was used to running teams of around the size of 6 to 12 people, which I thought was pretty cool at the time. And then I became the CTO of NDAP, which is 60 people, which, as you can imagine, is a significant jump from the 6 to 12 people you're used to mingling with. We're probably on track to become almost 100 by Christmas, which is, again, another significant scale challenge for us. And then after that, I'm probably going to go to retirement home, and then it will all be over as the career thing. And actually, that's kind of an interesting point, like the shift away from being very, very hands-on, where last year I was talking about how to do chatbots and some really cool stuff like on-call rotors with ChatOps, and then suddenly shifting to lots of like business interactions and financial planning and other things that I'm not actually particularly very good at, but have started to begin to transition to doing. Actually, just conversations with the team is a really important part of my job now. So I once worked for a dough-based startup, which I won't name, and I made a fun picture for you with dough stuff, like that's cheese. Again, remember the cat. Generally, these are the principles we used to work by to go really, really fast in this dough-based startup. So we would have only one environment, because you can spend forever messing around with environments, and I guess if you're not good provisioning them, if you're not good at maintaining them, if they are pets rather than cattle, you're going to burn a substantial amount of time looking after those environments. So generally, the idea is to not have any more than a single environment. And I know a few of you are like, that's impossible, but like, we'll talk about how to do that. Feature flags support the argument to not have environments. So, and that's just not the idea of being able to turn stuff on and off. That's a mentality that we introduce in code. That is the belief and thinking that a DevOps engineer is a redefinition of what engineering is. It's not just somebody who used to do ops. It's not just like this new thing. It's people who code, who are doing ops work, but as code. So when you start talking about, I'm going to write feature flags, that's something that we're going to start thinking about when we build a feature in code, and it's at the forefront of our mind. When we start writing tests, we're going to write a test that tests that flag. And we'll do that before we change any functionality, right? So there are then two distinct code paths, and it's something that we actually do in development. It's no one else's responsibility. Like turning that stuff on and off in production using a console is so tertiary to the implementation fact. have bulkheads to limit blast radius. So if any of you have ever done like a substantial amount of Terraform, there's like a ton of different ways to do this. And again, when I inherited NDAP, we had a really, really interesting pattern where somebody had gone, right, we'll take all of the S3 resources for absolutely everybody that has one and bung it into a single repo. Right, that seems super clever, because now I've got 10,000 PRs from a bunch of different people. I have no idea what they're doing, and my team spends a whole day reviewing those PRs, like crazy anti-pattern. The other interesting thing about this is like when you're doing something like CloudFront, and you bung CloudFront together with something else, like, do you really want to go and blow CloudFront up? Like, is it a good idea to move like Route 53 and CloudFront into a separate repo, just again to limit that blast radius in case something does go wrong or somebody nukes the resources in there or destroys the state file? So we tend to think, like, what are the important things we want to save? Feature flags generate better behavior in code, and I genuinely mean this. Like, when you're writing feature flags, you obviously have to go and test those things. So again, you're supporting multiple different code paths for a single feature. I'd say that's a pretty good argument for actually writing decent test coverage. External monitors to test behavior and current behavior. So one part of testing a new feature would be to go and write the feature flag. It would be to write the tests. But then how do you get to production, right? Do you want to go and write end-to-end tests? We all probably know that end-to-end tests will burn the most amount of time in your team, and they will cost the most amount of time to go and maintain. So I think the best thing you can go and do is write an external synthetic in its place and start testing those distinct pieces of behavior that says, like, this thing is working in production. Because then we can get really clever with SRE and start using our SLOs and SLIs to go and say, is this thing actually working? Like, is our observability in place and looking good? And then we can go and do cool stuff like carve up the traffic and say, okay, I'm going to send 1% of my production traffic to this new container, and I'm going to go and use all of my implements to go and measure if the thing is still working. And if it is, I'm going to automatically start shimming traffic from this old container to this brand new container very safely, because I have a mechanism for persistent feedback, and I now have built confidence that I don't need to manually test something. The point is confidence. Like, every time you build those tests, every time you build those synthetics, you're building confidence that you can go and push this to real users and you'll be okay. The fact that you can carve your traffic up to percentages and say, is this working on a new container? Confidence that you're not going to nuke your entire traffic base. Don't do end-to-end testing because it's slow, and use contracts instead. So again, like if you're doing microservices, using something like Packed Broker to be able to pull in distinct microservices and say these things are interoperating properly. Like, again, removing that need to go and do that end-to-end testing also means that those teams that are working on those microservices do have to go and talk to each other in case they've broken something. And it means that in pipeline, if you release something and you break a contract that somebody is dependent on, like, you're obviously not going to be able to push as well. So you're catching that stuff all in pipeline. So I've got a ton of confidence if I've got microservices, Packed Broker set up, and contracts well defined that I can't break anything, because if I was to break something, it will break the build. Test coverage 100% enforced in pipeline. So, like, how many of you are programmers? Got a couple. OK, cool. So code coverage is generally path-based. If you're doing this in Node, it's actually like an iterator that gets inserted into the code, and it tells you how many times that thing's actually been touched. But what it won't do is cover things like negative, right? So if you're going to test an error, like, what won't show up is that you've tested a non-200 response. What won't show up is that you've tested a Duff network response or a DNS failure in Node. Like, none of that stuff will show up in your test coverage, because that's all negative. Generally, you will have two paths. Like, if you have an if statement, you've got the if, and then you've got the else. That stuff shows up. But it doesn't show negative. So your negative testing should almost certainly outweigh the magnitude of testing that you've got for positive stuff. Right? That's where the majority of the work lives. So I always say that enforcing 100% test coverage is your low-hanging fruit. That's, like, super easy to do. Like, there's really no excuse. Because, like, otherwise you're saying it's okay to go and push stuff out with, like, less than 100% coverage. And also, if you've got maybe a test strategy that says it's okay to push something out with failing tests, like, you're probably responsible for killing, like, lots of kittens in the world. Everything in the cloud will break, so use plenty of queues. Like, this should be second nature to everybody here, but it's all ephemeral, right? You can't rely on anything. If you've read the SRE, the first SRE book by Google, they mention the locking service, the global locking service, Cubby, one of those two. And a really good story about a team that was super dependent on that, and they were super dependent on that because the damn thing never broke, right? So it generates this behavior of like, it's so safe to be hard-coded as this thing and not worry about it that I can go and do that. And so what the SRE team was actually do was to introduce artificial failure into that service so that they could make their code more resilient, which is quite an interesting prospect. And so the idea that stuff isn't going to be there, and actually this is one of those problems that I inherited when I took over NDAP. We have customers still that have engineered it in such a way that there are no queues, and so when infrastructure does fall over, things still happen. So we're working through that development maturity piece with them. But it just goes to show you, like, you can build the greatest platform in the world, and you can provide all the tooling in the world, but if you can't do proper development maturity, if you can't code for cloud native, it's all for naught. Monitor all parts of your funnel. So like, this is just a sales piece. So if you are doing like customer digital journeys, make sure that you've got your funnel set up and you're making sure that you know where the drop-offs are, that you have enough things being measured, that you're able to go and say, well, you know, I've gone and pushed a new version of maybe React Forms, and I can go and see that maybe Samsung devices are now dying, and I'm not seeing the sales conversion specifically from Samsung devices. Like that sort of information, that sort of foresight on like, this is a customer-facing thing and people are mostly on mobile these days, like you need to be able to drill into that. Alert week on week. So again, if you're using things, and we've used StatSpots for this in the past with Google Analytics to be able to go and say, like, my week on week is X, and this week it looks like it's down, and that looks like an erroneous result, so something clearly must have happened. Did we push code? Regression is a testing problem. I love making this point, right? So how many people on a weekly basis hear the word regression? Yeah, right? You can't get regression if you've got a test. Fact, right? Regression means that you don't have testing in place. Because if you have a test, the test says something should work like that. And that's a thing. That's like an immovable point in the sand, right? It can't move if you've got a test there. If you haven't got a test, right, clearly something can regress. But that just says that you've got no test coverage or you haven't got tests in place. Like, it is a testing problem. Just put tests in place and you can't have regression. Environments are a testing problem. Like, these are a manifestation of having poor testing. Like, if I had good enough testing, good enough confidence that the thing that I was pushing out was going to work, I obviously wouldn't need environments. My test strategy at Nationwide says that in an optimum world, I need 7 environments. That is incredible. I think that's nuts. But that's what the test strategy says at Nationwide, that we need 7 environments to go and test all the multitudes of data and whatnot. And this is like averaged over all the type of work that we do. 7 environments. How do you manage that stuff and upgrade it? 7 little pets I now have to feed and look after and put to bed every night. Nuts. Databases are a bastard. I told you I was a sweary one. Right? So we don't like data problems because it's an absolute pain in the ass. Anytime you'll do, like, Mongo is probably one of the nicest because you can go and do the change data capture and then shim over. There are some quite funky solutions for this. SQL being horribly nasty because it always has that second layer of, here are my scripts to go and upgrade things and transform tables into other things, and then how do I go and roll that back, and what does this big giant upgrade transaction look like, and if that fails, oh fuck, and then how do I go put the data back into it, and how do I do that with another database that now looks different? Like, that's a horrible problem to have. Like, try and avoid those problems, but there are actually some really funky tools out there to go and do that, but I'm going to carry on like avoiding those problems in my career. Feature flags won't protect you from framework changes. So one of the things that this database startup that we did was to go and have feature flags as just HTTP. So we were going to have a request that said X feature flag equals la la la, which is really cool. Like, that's a lightweight way of doing feature flags. And obviously you're interpreting that in the code. I guess what that doesn't protect you from is framework changes. So if you were to go and introduce a framework change, maybe like React, and that didn't go so well, or it didn't like a particular device, there's obviously, like, it's quite difficult unless you're lazily loading those libraries to go and carve that feature flag up against those. So unless you're thinking about that sort of stuff, like maybe things like Launch Darkly. I don't know if there's some Launch Darkly folks here, but that's a really nice product to do this. Observability is a key part of going faster. So, like, this is part of control theory. So the idea is that you can infer knowledge of how well the system's working from its external output. So generally, you're looking at tracing, logging, metrics. I think somebody was talking about open tracing earlier and showing you how to do that in Elastic, like super powerful thing to go and do. If you can really get your head around service mesh, a cheap way of doing it is that. And then obviously logging and metrics. For logging, and I'm quite I have a development background, so I'm quite prissy about this, but when you log, and it's one of the first things that I learned at a high-performing team, think really carefully about what an error is. Like, what is an error? Like, what is the behavior that you're trying to get off the back of that error? So if I'm logging like a level 50, like that's when I want people to jump. And if I don't want a reaction from people, I shouldn't log a level 50. I should log something else. And it's the first thing I learned because I was used to just putting errors in my code all the time, like this is an error, right? I didn't really think about the behavior, like what did I want people to do when there was this error? Like it's hitting things. And then you hit this high-performing team and you log this error for the first time and like fucking Christmas tree lights up, like everywhere. And people on Slack panicking because there's a fucking level 50 everywhere. It's like, shit, we never see these things. And that was the first time that I learned that like, don't log level 50s unless you mean it. So in this high-performing startup, the whole pipeline development thing looked like this. So we've got local development, and the whole idea with local development, I'm a big proponent of this, like protect yourself. Like it's your first opportunity to protect yourself from crap code going to a repo somewhere, right? Pre-push hooks, whether you're doing that in Node, whether you're doing that with pre-push on pip, there's a ton of different ways to do this, but you can protect yourself from pushing and do a bunch of cool stuff, right? So you're going to do your tests, you're going to go and do your flag tests, you're going to do your monitoring, you're going to go and do your linting, you're going to do your maybe your NPM audit and go and make sure you've got no vulnerabilities in your code. All of that stuff you can go and enforce before you push your code to any sort of repository. Then you're going to go and run those things in the pipeline. Then we're going to go and do our contract test if it's a microservice that has any sort of contracts. We're going to go and lint it. We're going to do our DAST. We're going to go and do our SAST. Then we're going to go to production. And production, like we've written already, synthetic monitors. So the idea is that this code goes out, like those monitors are going to light up like a Christmas tree, right? They're going to go green the first time you've ever pushed something, because in theory, this monitor will already be there. So it goes green the first time. And then obviously when you break something, that monitor is going to go red when it's like horrible. And again, if you're super advanced, you can go and carve up your traffic and use those to control whether it's the right thing to do or not. SLIs and SLOs, these are how you're going to measure that things are actually working, like what is the error rate, and then what is the error rate you're expecting for a single person on this container and this new version of this build. Thresholds, so if you're building features, I would be expecting you to define like what is a comfortable threshold for anything. Like at which point do you think like you've not got enough orders coming through? Or at which point, like, the error volume is not comfortable for you? Like, that for me, that's not anybody's task but a developer, right? If you're building features, that is a development task. Manual testing, which if you're the developer or development team pushing something out, right, there's really no substitute for a quick sanity check to make sure things are where you think they are. And then obviously, like, Google Analytics. So some interesting stuff to go and look at. Automatic canary analysis, like, so I don't know if anyone's working with Spinnaker or K8s, which is a pretty cool little tool that lets you go and do what we call automatic canary analysis. And this is that simple idea of being able to go and have something in production, push a new version of that thing, go and slide a percentage of your production traffic to the new instance of the container to go and look at your SLIs and say, are these still in line with your SLOs? And then go and shim that live traffic over and say, like, I'm comfortable, let's do 10%. Like, I'm still comfortable, let's do 50%. I'm still comfortable at 100, let's deprecate the old baseline container and make this new container the new baseline. And again, it's that confidence to continue to go and push that stuff out. And then open tracing. So again, I think some folks have talked about this, but like if you're tracing through your microservices, like this is so useful. I think there was a talk last year from Skyscanner where those folks had like 100 microservices or maybe some more than that. Like, I imagine those folks are really deep into that. I have a lot less of those microservices, but certainly my customers at the moment and the teams that work for me in NDAP are busy trying to do some education pieces on why it's a really good idea for us to adopt open tracing and how folks are able to go and do that quite quickly. What's the latest with that Dope-based startup? So they have some scale problems. What was really cool about it was we went super fast because we were focusing on a single market in the UK. So you kind of know all your variables and you know the domain that you're working in really, really well. And when those folks went to go and work with a new market like France, for example, France like has a really ropey postcode system, and the one in the UK is quite durable, but the one in France is like not so durable, and people don't tend to use it so much. And so like, how do you deliver pizzas where you don't have a postcode? That was quite an interesting problem for that UK team to go and face into. And then obviously there were some differences with how they present websites and languages, and locales and stuff like that. So I think they lost a ton of cadence there, and I think that's probably that moment they should have reflected on like what is the right model to go and use. So back at the really, really big building society, and I want to say like a bank, because some people maybe don't know what a building society is, but like I'm not allowed to say bank because it's a swear word to us, so I have to say it's a building society, but it's a bit like a bank, but it's not. Broadly speaking, the digital model looks something like this. So we have a ton of what we call hubs, and those are home, NDAP, the Nationwide Digital Accelerator Platform, which is mine, everyday banking. And inside those digital hubs, they have digital journeys. And these are the things that maybe you're doing like Switcher, which is to switch your mortgage, Remo to remortgage, Later Life, which is where you're like old and you won't be with us for much longer, and you maybe want to go and like release some of the equity in your house, like you would go and use Later Life to do that. And then everyday banking deal with credit cards and under 18 accounts and stuff like that. So there's a distinct digital journeys within the bank that belong to a hub that sort of has an overall ownership for it. Now, the challenge that I faced was like I got to manage like 60 people, and literally 12 was the biggest team that I've ever managed. And they don't like me either. They really hate me because I've come in and now like the partner that was originally running NDAP is like being asked to like shimmy sideways, and I've come in with like new ideas on my big self, and they're not too happy about it. The way that I sort of fixed that was to start bringing in people from my personal network. So I spent a long time growing a network of really great ideas. Like Mark, as an example, like being able to lean on these people in my personal network was absolutely critical to being successful at the thing that I've just done. And what I found also was that within the building society itself, hiring people took a super long time. Like it was really difficult to get people through the pipeline. It took me 6 months to get one permanent person hired off my internal network. So we had to go and like flesh out all these problems that were quite difficult. The next problem was like weird little groups of people making you feel super left out. So because they were partners and they were all used to working together, like I'd frequently walk in and you'd find like 5 of them huddled around a laptop, and you'd be like, "Yo guys, what's up?" And they look up at you and smile, and you're like, "But there's like 5 of you around a laptop, like so clearly something's up, eh?" And they're just like nodding at you like nothing's wrong, and you're like, "Just what's the problem?" Like common, I don't know if that's like a common partner thing, but that was a real thing. And so the kind of the answer here was to like give a much flatter way to communicate. So we brought Slack in. That took like a significant amount of time. And then we started to introduce the terms of like try annotating, like or narrating the thing that you're doing. And because we have now 2 distinct sites as well, being able to narrate what you're doing, like in live, sort of negates the reason for them to huddle around a single laptop anymore. And then obviously different distinct sites are now able to get involved in what's happening, and we tend to set up like a channel when something's happening so that we can follow it really easily and people can jump in and get involved. The model looks like this. And so at Christmas when I came in, we had like almost 3 distinct teams inside NDAP, 2 cloud teams and a DevOps team. Is that cool? What a stupid anti-pattern. A DevOps team, right? That's like having a DevOps guy on a programming team. All right, that doesn't work. So we asked some people to leave, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I've never done this. So my hypothesis was that as an engineer, I loved running smaller teams, and I loved creating that sense of family. I love it when people love what they're doing. So I thought, I'm going to make loads of really small teams, and like I don't like doing stand-up, and I don't like doing all these things, so I'll give them all a Scrum Master, and they can do all the things that they don't like doing as engineers, and they can just focus on the stuff that they're really, really great at. So we built this layer. So we have Lighthouse, Quantum, Blue Knights, Mavericks, Guerreros. I call them the London Homeless because they don't have a name yet, but they're the London Homeless. And Dovetail, which is a new squad. And then you have this leadership team with Neil and myself, and Neil is the delivery lead, and I'm the CTO. And then we have what's called the navigation team. And I don't know how many people have seen this, but this is kind of like a mixture of BAs, and we call them navigators, and I don't really know how to relate that role to anybody, but these folks are really good at picking things up and running them through governance. Going to have those little fuzzy meetings that probably don't need my attention, but need somebody to be there and do like face-to-face and talk about NDAP and talk about some of the things that we're doing, getting things procured for us. They just do generally all the things that we would be really rubbish at, I would be extra rubbish at, Neil doesn't have time to do. And so they're just like this big support layer inside the team that like Greece. I saw this documentary once about like trucks going across Africa, and then this axle at the back broke, and the guy undid the bolts and stuff and threw a banana in there, and he used the banana as grease. And I thought, that reminds me of the navigation team. Like, they just keep everything turning a little bit. So when people join NDApp, the first thing I ask is like, you're really awesome. Like, what do you want to do? So rather than saying like, I've got this thing in mind for you, like I need you to fix X, like we tend to ask people like, what do you want to do? Like you've got really broad skills and you're very cool and you do all this stuff, like how can you help us? And so I'll talk through the problems that we've got and some of the stuff that we're doing, and then they'll tell me some stuff, and then we'll sort of figure out where they're going. And generally, they either want to be in a squad or they want to run a squad, and then we'll figure out like how that works, and off they go. When we came back from Christmas, ownership was a big deal to me. So I've made all these changes to the model, and I really need this to work out somehow. So I'm thinking like, how do I create a sense of ownership? So we sent an artist off-site with every single one of the squads, and we said, brand yourselves. Come up with your logos, come up with your values, learn who the people are around you that you're working with, and then run with it, right? So this artist came back, and he'd drawn all this stuff, and so that's where we've got Lighthouse, Mavericks, Quantum Knights actually fused now, so the Blue Knights and Quantum fused, and became like a slightly bigger squad, temporarily. The Guerreros, Dovetail, and the Tizen team, which are the Navigators. And I thought that was pretty cool. And we haven't lost any squads yet, and we haven't had to disband any squads, but they all have a very unique identity. I'll show you some of the stuff they've done later. Support was like another problem. So when I came in, I had 6 people on the platform who were basically doing support. And like nobody else, this is like at 60 people, no one else was doing support. Like you can sort of imagine, like, and take a wild guess, like the sort of behaviors that we generated. Like we now had 6 people who are extra good on every system in NDApp, and like no folks that could do it, plenty of folks with no access to those systems. Like it was obviously stupid. So I then said, right, we're going to introduce a new model. We're going to have 2 people on support every day. We're going to rotate those people every day. It's going to suck for like 3 weeks because none of you are going to have the access that you need. But by the end of that, we'll have a good idea about what access you need. We'll have automated the ability to give you that access, and then you'll learn about all the systems on NDApp. And it turns out like our favorite way for people to upskill in NDApp is to go on support. And the persistent feedback that I get, like if you want to learn how NDApp works, like go on support because you touch everything. And there's always some folks with you who are like super helpful now, who have been through the pain that you're going through, and that's worked out really cool. Also the MI as well, like being able to just look at what sorts of tickets we had coming in and where our customers had demand for us, that was majorly important, and it's helped shape like whether we wanted to work on particular things. Like Jenkins was causing 40% of our issues in the platform. Credentials and certificates were like another 40% of support. Really interesting stuff. So like just having to carve out that new model where we started to track stuff, close off all those side demands where people were running to people that they knew. Because again, with 6 people always on support, that means that probably the 8 digital hubs that I've got in production are running to 6 people all the time going like, hey, can you fix this thing? Like side channel shit. Like really not useful if you're trying to like control the flow of demand in your platform. So what behaviors am I trying to encourage? And I ask this a lot when we try and do anything new. Like what are we trying to inceptionalize here? Like what is the thing that we want that's going to last? And a really good example of this, like we created a bunch of watches in Elk, right, in Kibana. We did it via the UI. Like, what behavior did that create? It created a cottage industry of people now maintaining these bloody watches in Kibana. Like, that's not useful at all. Right, so moving that to code was a really good way to get rid of that and make it more maintainable and in line with what we do. Dashboards generate bums on seats behavior rather than working towards proactive alerting. Does everyone find this? Like, when everyone says, like, I'll create a dashboard, why are you creating a fucking dashboard? Like, go and create some alerts. That's what we live and breathe, right? I want alerts because I know what to do. If you create a dashboard, someone's going to sit there and watch that dashboard. That's stupid. The only people that need that dashboard are compliance, almost always. Everybody I hired since I joined NDApp writes code. So some people do have an infra background and they learn how to code, but to get through the door on the platform, you have to be able to code. And the stuff that's changed since I've done that, the watches in Kibana became code instead of a UI clicky thing that was unmaintainable in a cottage industry. The Terraform repos will magically have tests now, or most of them are on their way to having actual tests. The first question generally is, how do we do this in code? Because it's way more maintainable. The next question they generally ask is, like, if we're not good at this, like, how can we get halfway? So there are a ton of things that we have to do in our compliance framework, and some of them are very difficult to express as code. So things like review this documentation every 30 days or every 90 days. Like, how can you do that? And so we have a sort of working hypothesis now that we'll probably go and commit maybe a CSV to Git, and we'll go and write a Prometheus exporter, and we'll go and look at that thing and make sure that somebody's GPVG signature can be authenticated and has been committed to that. And then we'll go and have a dashboard for compliance somewhere that we won't use, but we'll have some alerts that tell us 30 days before that we need to go and add a signature or go and do that compliance check. Like, it's not really massively sexy, but it's this thing, because we're a financial services organization, we kind of have to do this stuff. So the team's always thinking, like, how can we get like halfway, or how can we get most of the way to making these very unsexy things DevOpsable and gone away, right? Because you know that I've got a ton of platform engineers who will not be good at this stuff, and I don't want to keep lumping it on my navigation team. We have a chatbot incoming, so I spoke really at length about this last year, and it's a super passionate topic of mine, but it's taken some while to go through the governance process to get that in. But we've got a ton of really great ideas for our customers in terms of how to give them functionality. Dovetail, which is my new favorite squad, kind of like favorite. I don't want to say favorite because Mark's my favorite squad, but my favorite squad in that they're customer facing. So these folks aren't just platform engineers. These people write applications more, like, I guess everyone in NetApp has wrote applications, but these folks still do it. And they're there to sort of go and teach things like open tracing, to run dojos with folks, to say, this is how you can go and adopt service mesh. This is like the uber elite way to go and do something. Their whole existence is to upskill the maturity of all of those digital hubs. So like, it's a full service thing in NetApp now. And something called ephemeral clusters, which I'll go into in a sec, which is a current problem of creating clusters that then become pets in production that have to be upgraded and looked after, and we've got like a ton of these pets, and they drive me nuts because like there's no guarantees, right? Every time I go and patch a CVE, like there's no guarantee that thing carries on working. Every time I upgrade something, there's no guarantees it carries on working. Every upgrade is a risk. Like, so we want to get rid of that and have this concept of moving laterally. I thought I'd show some pictures of NDAP. So like, this is one of our walls. I think this is near the support wall. Mavericks board, they're quite expressive. Quantum blue nights, and they estimate things in terms of planets and distance. Our support wall, which gives you a bit of MI and tells you like roughly the direction of travel that we're heading in. Our roadmap, which is quite visible and open to everybody. The Guerreros board, which is like kind of light. I like what they're doing over here. Quantum, who are nuts. Like, you can clearly tell like the crazy people in the team, and they've gone all out. What's interesting about this is, like, you can see it's not like one way, it's not uniform. And that is a manifestation of like that principle of, we'll give you the resources and we'll give you the space, and you can go and figure out how you want to operate, right? There's no need for uniformity. We just have to like interlock in the right way. These are some of the hubs that we work with and some of the people that are involved in there, so we make sure people know who runs those hubs and what position they're in. And then we have this painkillers board as well. So just when we feel like there's toil and friction and things like that, we make sure we put it on the painkillers board, and that's something we'll prioritize and try and make sure we can go and do something good with. These are the dashboards. So like, what's really funny about this is that nobody in NDAP uses these dashboards. These TVs got installed for somebody to walk past and look at and go, it's all green. It's working. I'm not even joking. Like, we don't use them. They were there to appease the rest of the organization. And that's super interesting, right? Like, that they were so, like, this is the way that we're going to work, and we're going to have these dashboards, and when we walk past and see they're green, we know that you're working. Like, we don't perpetuate that in NDAP, and so we keep this stuff working, but we're obviously reliant on alerts and better ways of working. And some, like, really, like, agile sort of, like, building things. And this is the NDAP team, and so actually it's really big. Like, you can't see behind them, but there's like a ton of engineers over there as well. But we're doing like a bit of an all hands here, where we just sort of talk about the stuff that we built in reflection, and everyone does like a pitch of like, this is what we did. It's been a 2-week sprint, and this is the stuff we're going to do next time. Our daily, I guess, ceremonies sort of look like this, where we are having the nav team come in before everybody else. So they tend to have like their daily stand-up, and it's where all the organization in NDAP happens. Neil has a stand-up with Scrum Masters. It says Aubrey has stand-up with the engineering leads. That doesn't work. That doesn't work so well for me. I'm quite busy. I'm often like in meetings very early, and so I don't tend to make it to that. So we're going to kill that, and we're going to have a tech forum that happens once a week, and I'm going to go there and spend some time with the folks, and we're going to talk about how we deal with toil and new pieces of engineering work, and then I'm going to stay up to date that way. Because some stuff just doesn't work, right? But you can see, like, I did the normal, like, this is what everyone else does, It turns out it just doesn't work for me, so we're going to try something different. Sprint planning happens pre-sprint. Reflection is like a big important piece where we're sort of selling to probably internal customers and to the rest of the team the good work that we've done. And then a retro. Retros aren't prescriptive. We do them when we feel we need them. So kind of like a pressure valve when we feel like it's got too much, or we've got a lot to say, or we're sort of heading towards discontent. We will say, like, it's time to run a retro and get it all out. And then we obviously take that feedback and make sure that we're committing to actioning anything that we've said that we're going to action off the back of it. And then weekly, we do backlog grooming. In fact, actually, probably 2 times weekly, we do toil and backlog grooming. Because you can imagine, like, as a platform, we get a ton of toil off people and things they're not happy with, so we have to go and factor that in. We kill toil forever with enhancements. So if you do have toil, that's your indicator that maybe you need to go and wrap it up into an enhancement. But it's not like you don't have to kill it, right? We make calls all the time where it's like, this is costing 30 minutes every month. Like, we're not going to invest the engineering time into this for a while. Like, but it's a sort of way to go and feel that something is not right somewhere. It's like a blister, right? When you've got a dodgy shoe on, you get a blister. And then the tech forum, which is the new hypothesis that it will be really good for everybody on the team to be involved in technical decisions like a bit more. And so this is the forum where we'll say, like, this is a piece of toil, we could solve it X ways, and if we can make a decision on how we're going to solve it, we'll write an architectural decision record and commit that to Git somewhere. Lateral agility, one of our biggest problems, so the pets that I talked about. I have this principle of, like, don't upgrade anything, like, just ask people to move. So what we're working on in this, and I don't want to go into detail about what we run, but it kind of works like a little bit like this, where we're on Amazon doing cops. And we've got this workload, and what we really want to do is get from, like, K8s version 11 to 14, right? There's a problem. And so this whole idea is that we will go and deploy a completely new stack. We call it common platform, where everything is built into the cluster. And then our customers after will go and control using an external GTM or global traffic management, like where their ingress points are on the platform. Old platform, new platform. And they're going to go shim stuff over to the new one. And in theory, if their observability is good enough, if their tests are good enough, if they've shimmed over just the smallest amount of traffic, they'll get a good feedback loop on whether this thing is actually working on a brand new distinct version of the platform. And then hopefully they can go and shim some other stuff over. So entirely owned by platform is like common platform. Totally the hubs are containers. And then at some point this year, maybe we'll do some sugar and we'll do some engineering and make it really easy to move sideways. The whole idea is cattle, not pets, because again, if we're deploying these clusters and upgrading things in them, like the moment you're upgrading, you're like creating a pet. There's no guarantees that upgrade's going to work. Governance and risk in the organization is one of our biggest problems. And so we have a compliance framework and a controls framework and a bunch of guardrails, which we're now calling standards in the taxonomy, to go and adhere to. A good example of some of those is that when our customers do builds, we produce evidence for them. So going through Veracode, being able to run through Sonar, knowing that something's actually got dumped into ECR, this is evidence that's then popped into Confluence. And then you can go to that page and say, like, this build here had all these things run against it and track it back. So that's how we show compliance in the organization. Not so useful for us, but like actually useful for the organization. So what's next? Platform, again, like one facet, right? You can build a really, really great platform, and people can still go and fuck up their cloud-native designs, 100%, right? So it's not the real problem. Like, building a platform is actually pretty easy. The real burning tire fire is that we've got a whole organization with a ton of stuff that they built many, many years ago, with a ton of people that did this many, many years ago, and no idea how to go cloud-native. So the next part of our focus is how do we do development excellence? And that whole dovetail team that we've just introduced, those are the folks that are going to go to those customers and sort of start nurturing them. They're likely to go into introduce what's called a DBOT model, which is called design, build, operate, and transfer. So one of the common problems we've had with new hubs or journeys spinning up was like, we can't hire people. We don't have any experience in our hub to go and like build the designs for these things in cloud native. We're making a ton of mistakes that it seems like loads of other people have already made. So that whole squad will go in, kind of like a skeleton, and they will hire the right people, start solutioning for those people, get them going on the platform, teach all the good things to the new folks, and then roll off. And that's kind of how we're solving that development excellence piece, at least at the moment, in NDAP. So thank you for listening to me. And again, if you can tweet and say, like, this was really good, please let them come again and get pissed next year. That would be super awesome. Thank you. Questions about working in financial services? No? Maybe? 2 questions?
Thank you for the talk. I think that using planets and distances for estimation is the coolest thing I ever seen in my life.
I will tell them that.
I won't be able to sleep until I get my team to do that, so thanks for that.
I love it.
How many navigators do you have? What was the ratio between regular developers and navigation?
Yeah, so incredibly, like the nav team is like 12 people now. And it's really interesting because the other morning, one of the Scrum Masters came to the navigation stand-up, which is big. And they said, like, do you think Titan's getting a bit big now? Like, maybe we should break it up. And I said, like, why? Like, where's the evidence? Like, where's the friction, right? Like, so what, there's 12 people there. But if it's working, that's cool. But we run on, like, actual real-world problems. So, like, where is the friction? No friction, no breakup. So nav team has grown faster than any other squad, like, faster than we've grown the squads overall. Like, they're 12 now, and I think we've got like, 3 more people incoming. And it's just like for... I don't know what the ratio is, but I guess like you've almost got like 2 navigators almost working per squad. It's not like direct; they do lots of different things, but like there's tons of them, and they're growing like faster than we're growing the engineers. I think just because of the amount of stuff that we do in the organization, where it's governance based, or having to go and procure things, or do little risk forms to say that we need to procure this product and it's not risky anymore. Like they do all that stuff for us. That's better than last year, right? I got no questions last year.
No, I've got another one, actually. So in one of the slides, you had like you were going to another Kubernetes version, right?
Yep.
And you were doing this in a canary way. So on which level did you do this canary switch?
So move to distinct versions of K8s?
Yeah, between the clusters.
Yeah, so the challenge here is like how do you do it, right? You could go and federate and shift stuff sideways, but there's risk if you're doing different versions. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go back to the engineering and back to each one of these journeys and say, you need a way to deploy the whole application, right? So whether it's Helm, whether it's a Helm chart that says, this is your whole app, and then data is a separate problem, the idea is that they'll be able to go and deploy the whole thing again, and that is going to be painful to start with, and then we'll use the GTM to go and shim traffic over from like the ingress point to the platform, and then when they feel comfortable with the level of observability and their monitoring and it's where they need it to be, that's the point where they'll up traffic and we'll decommission the old platform. And the idea is that if we go and tackle this in engineering, it will be more comfortable for people to get used to like deploying their thing over and over again without like having these little pets they have to look after, or saying like, it's really hard to deploy my microservice, I have to change the pipeline and everything. Like, we have to make that go away. So there'll be this behavior in NDAP that everybody gets used to deploying their application again and moving sideways. So lots of things like data haven't really been figured out too much, and I guess we don't have an awful lot, because I don't know if anyone who works in regulated environments, your system of record where you store stuff is like kind of difficult to put in the cloud because the regulators don't like it, so we only have like augmented data. But generally, like if you take data out of it, deploying the application stack itself should be relatively straightforward.
Thank you.
No more questions? No? Okay. So thank you very much, Aubrey.